Have you noticed recently how films are getting more and more crisp? You watch a scene in the modern day blockbuster and sense this level of smoothness to it. The visuals feel more sharp and clear, but somehow across the board, very similar and repetitive. For the lack of a better word, this is what people call the clean look. And as you might have noticed yourself or heard people talk about it, it is in a way ruining the movie experience. And I don't want to be that person who lives in the past to tell you that movies were better back in the day. In fact, I feel like if you really wanted to watch good films, there are still plenty of them being released, possibly even every week. But what I'm talking about is not the storytelling aspect of a good film, not even the novelty of it, but it is primarily about the aesthetics of it, how it looks and how it feels to the viewer. Take for instance The Lord of the Rings. I don't think I have to specify how the original trilogy is distinctly unique from everything else that succeeded it. Probably about 99% of the people who watched the trilogy would simply tell you that the original simply looks better in every shape and form. It stands the test of time, and be it the Hobbit movies or even the Rings of Power, they don't capture the essence of the books, at least not in the best way possible. But why is that? And you know what? The answer to that, as I recently realized, is not even that complicated. What it comes down to is the imperfections in films, or to be much more precise, a lack thereof imperfections. You see, imperfections does sound like a buzzword, and I understand that. But from an artistic perspective, there is something about these imperfections that brings personality to the visuals. Whether it be the film grains or thoughtful lighting or even practical set designs, well, they carry a bit of substance that transcends the visual story. For instance, a feature such as contrast, the difference in brightness between the dark and light parts of an image. The more contrast there exists, the better is the distinction between the shadows and the highlights. And speaking of which, along these lines do we enter a conversation about shadows. And this is something that I've heard people talk about for a while now. And you also must have heard of it or even felt it yourself while watching a film. And that is the prevalence of neutral, gray, flat shadows in modern films. You pick a film and you pause it on a dark frame, and more often than not, you see more than what you're meant to see. Look at this frame from The Hobbit. This is supposed to be a dark, murky forest. At least that is the implication here. But notice how even in this dark environment, you can pretty much see everything that's in front of you. The shadows are soft and not to mention pervasive, meaning the shadows are spread evenly across the scene, not focused or directional. They sort of fill up everything softly, instead of creating sharp shapes or contrast. And this is something that you can find all over the Hobbit trilogy. Shots where the shadows and highlights are very neutral, creating distinctly flat, one-dimensional frames. And if you don't trust me, just take a look at The Lord of the Rings. I tried picking two similar frames so that there won't be any discrepancies in the way you picture these landscapes. This is a frame from the Two Towers, and this is a frame from the Desolation of Smaug. And right off the bat, just looking at them, they kind of feel the same, right? But here's the thing. When you put these frames side by side, which one looks more realistic? Which one seems to have more contrast? It might just be a subtle thing, but look at how dark the shadows are in the first frame. You can zoom into it as much as you want, but you won't see any details in there. Because hello, this is a dark forest. Your eyes are not meant to see everything that's in there. It is quite frankly the most natural way this would look. But in the second frame, as I zoom in, I can still see some details on the roots and the branches. They still do quite a good job of conveying the darkness, but the contrast here is nowhere near that of the first one. And so, it looks neutral and flat, and in my opinion, a bit dimensionless. And it's quite visible, these sort of half-baked shots, because when they actually film stuff in real locations with the right intention, the shots actually look pretty good. And just in case you're wondering, the camera you film with does indeed make a difference here. While the Lord of the Rings trilogy was shot primarily on 35mm film stock, the Hobbit films was entirely digital, shot on the Red Epic cameras. And in doing so, digital cameras do expose a lot more on the frame than your typical film cameras because of its high dynamic range. But still, that's not really an excuse for it. Just listen to what Roger Deakins, arguably the greatest cinematographer of our time, has to say about this debate.
On film, I'm just playing a little safe because there's always the imponderables. I might go too far underexposed, or I might go too far over, or whatever. But here I can do it and see it and go further, you know. So it's good. It's great. It's a bigger palette really than I feel I can get from film.
And to back it up, just have a look at his cinematography over the years. While looking at some of his works, it's quite easy to think that these visuals were shot on film, but they just aren't. Just look at how dark the shadows are here. Things don't look gray or neutral, and the contrast is quite frankly something so natural. And the word here is indeed natural. I think a lot of modern films take liberties when it comes to vision. The sensors on some of these cameras are so good that they pick up things that you're not meant to see. Imagine walking into a dark room with a candlelight. How plausible is it that it illuminates everything in the room? Not that much, right? But modern day movies would have you believe that you're meant to see everything in the dark. It's not exactly normal. And that's where the intentionality comes in. There's a chance that you might have watched a video on this by Patrick Tomaso, where he mentions the word intentionality. And I couldn't agree with him more on this topic. Art is something that you have to achieve on purpose. And the best example of this is perhaps also displayed by Roger Deakins in Blade Runner 2049. If you look at the original Blade Runner, you would see this intentionality in action. Of course, a movie that was shot on film had no other option but to create that high contrast. Just look at this frame from that film. The shadows are inky and black, and the highlights are incredibly bright when it needs to be. This is purposeful. The rays of light piercing the blinds to illuminate the room. This was an active choice by the cinematographer. But you would think that the new Blade Runner, a movie that came out in 2017, something considered to be fairly modern, shot on digital camera no less, would not even be able to hold a candle to the original. But then again, if you have watched some of these shots, you'd immediately think otherwise. And this is the statement of intent that we're talking about. There are times when you watch this film when you feel like the shadows are flat and devoid of details, when the things do simulate that neutral grayish tone that we see in modern films. But that is done on purpose. This is a dystopian setting, a cyberpunk world that was overrun by fog and corporate greed. And that foggy atmospheric look generally messes with the contrast of some of these scenes. But when you look at the right frame, you get those inky dark shadows, things that look purposefully lit to meet an artistic goal. And even with that same camera, you might catch even darker shadows in the likes of Prisoners or Sicario. And that is my point. It's not a clear distinction between film or digital that creates these flat images. It is the artist's intention. And speaking of the very intention, in modern times you might have heard people talk about this term called the marvelization of films. It is simply the term used for movies that use a lot of CGI with that flat, neutral lighting. And without a doubt, it is the Marvel movies that put this style on the map. And it's not that there's anything inherently wrong with such clean stylistic choices, but it's simply the fact that they feel lifeless and for the most part devoid of artistic intention. When you look at some of these frames, I'm sure the CGI artists put a lot of effort into these, but as a whole coherent frame, it just lacks something visceral. You see, when cinematographers know that a shot will need heavy VFX, they usually have to adjust how they light and shoot the scene to make the clean plates and compositing work smoothly. And this obviously has its problems. The clean plates need to be lit in a certain way that allows VFX artists to drop in digital characters, explosions, or even set extensions without awkward mismatches. And this means even lighting to avoid the harsh shadows. The result? Softer shadows which are devoid of that dramatic look. They prefer brighter shadows with lots of details because it's easier to make things darker in post-production than bringing back details from the dark shadows. And like I said before, this is pretty much why you see everything that's on the screen, even though every fiber of reality would tell you otherwise. This frame from Thor Love and Thunder is pretty grandiose. There is a lot going on here. But while seeing it for the first time, I could not believe how evenly lit the whole environment was. I mean, it is one thing to have light rays fill up a large hall, but where is the drama? Where is the contrast? Sure, things do look spectacular from a CGI point of view, but from a realistic point of view, why do I feel like this belongs to a video game? This is not what it used to be. Films used to have much more drama, even visually. I know this is probably not the exact same setting, but look at the way light and dark, shadows and highlights complements this scene from Harry Potter. And here's the thing, I just knew this would look exactly like this, even though I watched this film a long time ago. Because this is what the interior of a castle looks like. It's the way the world looks. But when you stare at this scene, you can't really seem to see any imperfections in it. Not that it can't be the exact vision of the shot, maybe they did mean this to look flawless. But still, too many frames in modern films look dimensionless, like bits of Lego or plastic toys kind of feel. And that is the other thing, where is all the texture? Sometimes it is these little things that make you feel immersed into a scene. The dust collected on top of a table, stains on a bit of clothing, or even flickering lights that struggle to light up a room. They add character to a scene. And there is a part of me who thinks that you'll never be able to get that in modern films. But there are films which are shot on digital cameras that are still able to replicate this. And again, if you really wanted to make some of these shots beautiful, you would. Because I have seen CGI shots in Marvel or other films that look simply stunning on the eye. But like Roger Deakins said, you have to have a vision from the very beginning. Instead of cutting costs and reducing time frames, just let the artist do their thing. Because as much as criticism this may sound, at the end of the day, is that not what all of us want? Movies are still art. Let's just all aspire to keep it that way.